It looked like a routine post-game question. Reporter walks up, microphone out, asks the losing player what went wrong. Simple stuff. You've seen it 1,000 times. The answer is usually something vague. They shot well tonight. We didn't execute. Credit to them. Forgettable. Disposable. The kind of answer that gets buried in a highlight reel. Nobody watches twice. But Sabrina didn't give that answer. New York had just lost to Indiana 106-92. The Fever had made 16 three-pointers. 16. The easy story writes itself. Indiana got hot. New York got buried. Check the box score and move on. But Ionescu stopped that story cold in just one sentence. Their bigs are a handful. She said, "We have to go and help in the paint, which allows kickouts." That sentence, quiet, almost casual, completely reframed what happened. This wasn't a story about Indiana catching fire. It was a story about a defensive structure being slowly, methodically dismantled. Music, and once you hear it that way, you can't unhear it. Because what ICU described wasn't bad luck. It was a trap. And the Indiana Fever had spent 40 minutes walking New York straight into it. So, let's talk about what's actually happening when you try to defend this team because the box score doesn't cover it. The highlight reels don't cover it. And after one night in Indianapolis, even music, the coaches couldn't fully explain it in real time. They could only describe the damage after it was done. The first thing you need to understand is that defending Indiana isn't really about stopping any one player. It's about surviving a music choice. A choice that has no good answer. Here's how it works. Indiana's interior players, led by Aaliyah Boston, are physical, skilled, and impossible to leave alone near the basket. When they operate close to the rim without defensive help, they punish you directly. Defenses know this, so they send help. A defender peels off the perimeter, steps toward the paint, and now Boston has a more difficult shot. Problem solved, right? Wrong. Because the moment that help defender moves, a gap opens somewhere else on the perimeter and Caitlin Clark is already scanning for it. That's the trap. Not Caitlin Clark alone, not Aaliyah Boston alone. The trap is the space created between them. The corridor of basketball geometry that forces a defense to be in two places at once. Help the paint, and Clark finds the open shooter on the kickout. Stay attached to shooters, and Clark attacks the lane herself. Push her farther from the basket, and the passing windows behind the first defender grow wider. There is no safe position. Every choice the defense makes is immediately turned into an advantage. New York head coach Chris DeMarco confirmed this openly after the game. The liberty. He said, "We're committed to taking away the paint." But he also acknowledged the price of that commitment. If we're going to commit to music taking the paint away, DeMara said, at times people are going to get open threes. That's not a coach admitting defeat. Music. That's a coach acknowledging the geometry of an unsolvable problem. New York didn't make the wrong choice. They made the only reasonable choice available, and Indiana punished them for it anyway. Now here's where Clark specifically becomes something different from any other player in the league. Music. Because the dilemma she creates doesn't start when she gets to the paint. It starts the moment she crosses half court. Against a conventional point guard, a defense has a relatively simple option. Retreat beneath the screen, music protect the basket, dare the guard to shoot from deep. Most guards, even good ones, make that a livable decision. The math favors the defense. Give up the long jumper. Load up near the basket. Contest the layup. Clark makes that math collapse. Her range from beyond the arc is genuine enough that a defender who sags off her is handing her an open look from 28 Belsaft. That's not a prayer. That's a high percentage shot for her specifically. So defenders have to come out higher. Closer, more aggressive, which means when a screen comes, they're already out of position, which means the lane opens. Which means help has to come from somewhere. Which music means a shooter is vacated somewhere else, which means Clark passes. The chain keeps moving. Every correct defensive decision creates the next problem. Ionescu named it clearly, Clark being the head of it with 10 assists. Her shooting ability forcing music the first defender out, her downhill pressure pulling the second defender in, and her reads finding whoever got left behind. 10 assists is the number that shows up in the box score. But 10 assists measures only the passes that became baskets. It doesn't count the possessions where Clark's mere presence shifted where a defender had to stand. It doesn't count the drive she started that forced help and then kicked out before anyone scored. It doesn't count the threat of her shot that pushed a defender's starting position 3ft closer to the arc, opening a passing lane that wouldn't have existed against anyone else. The advantage exists before the ball moves. That's what makes her different. But here's something that gets buried in the Clark conversation, and it's something Indiana opponents are going to have to reckon with very quickly. Clark can create advantages all night long. She can force the right choice and deliver the right pass every single possession, and it still means nothing if her teammates' music don't finish. Kelsey Mitchell finished 28 points, 11 for 16 from the field, 4 for 4 from three-point range. She made every open look the offense generated for her, and she made them fast. Her movement off the ball and the speed of her release are what turned Clark's reads into actual points before New York's defense music could scramble back into position. A pass to an open shooter is only lethal if the shooter converts. Mitchell converted every time. There was one stretch in the second quarter where Indiana made all 7 of its three-point attempts. 7 consecutive makes. Music not because Clark passed to 7 wide open and players standing motionless, because Indiana's movement, timing, and execution turned defensive rotations into scoring opportunities faster than the Liberty could recover. And Mitchell was at the center of that. She didn't need the ball in her hands for the entire possession. She just needed to be in the right place when Clark's read found her. And then she needed to make the shot. She did both repeatedly without hesitation. Without Mitchell's conversion rate, the correct pass becomes a statistical footnote. Clark makes the right read, the ball goes to the right place, and the defender arrives just in time to contest and force a miss. Then it's just a pretty assist attempt that didn't music count. Mitchell made it count every single time. Aaliyah Boston gets fewer headlines than Clark and Mitchell. That's understandable. 28 points grabs attention in a way that 7 rebounds and 4 assists don't always manage. But if you want to understand why Indiana's offense functions at this level, Boston might be the most important piece to examine. Her role isn't primarily to score. Her role is to exist in a specific part of the floor and force the defense to make a decision before the ball ever reaches her hands. When Boston positions herself near the basket, help defenders have to acknowledge her. They can't ignore a player of her caliber operating in the paint. The moment they acknowledge her, they've already moved. And the moment they've moved, Clark's passing window exists. Boston scored 19 points and added 7 rebounds and 4 assists against New York. That's a productive line by any standard. But the number that doesn't appear in the box score, the one that actually drove Indiana's offensive success, is how many times a defender left their shooter to account for her, only for Clark to find that shooter before the helper could recover. Her gravity is real. Interior gravity in basketball means your presence on the floor bends the defense toward you even when the ball is on the other side of the court. Boston has that gravity at a level where it consistently destabilizes an entire defensive structure. Remove her from Indiana's lineup and suddenly help defenders don't have to move as far or as fast. Clark's passing windows narrow. Mitchell gets contested more often. The whole chain slows down. With Boston, the decision point arrives earlier and costs more. New York believed she required help. They were right. And that belief is exactly what Indiana's offense depends on. 3 records came out of 1 game on August 11th. That by itself is remarkable. What makes it genuinely striking is that all 3 came from the same source. Music Indiana reached 100 points for the 15th time this season, extending its own WNBA single-season record. Clark's 10 assists gave her the league-leading 9th game this season with at least 20 points and 10 assists, also a WNBA record. Kelsey Mitchell's 28-point performance extended her streak of consecutive 20-point games to 17, another WNBA single-season record. 3 players, Music 3 records, 1 structure. Clark's scoring threat kept defenders from treating her as a distributor and backing off into passing lanes. Mitchell's scoring prevented defenses from collapsing every resource onto Clark. Boston's interior presence stopped teams from solving both guards with perimeter pressure alone. Each record was made possible by the conditions, Music, the other 2 created. New York had 3 fires to put out and 5 defenders to put them out with. Every attempted solution moved resources away from a different fire. The defense wasn't overwhelmed because Indiana was playing unsustainably perfect basketball. It was overwhelmed because Indiana's structure requires more correct simultaneous decisions than a defense can consistently deliver. Here's the counter-argument that deserves a real answer because it's not a bad one. Indiana shot roughly 64% from three-point range that night. That's not a normal number. That's not even a great night. That's an extraordinary one. The kind of conversion rate that even elite offenses can't promise on any given Tuesday. 11 makes on 14. First half attempts includes not just outstanding shot creation, but also a level of accuracy that defenses might look at and say, they can't do that again. They might be right. Ionescu raised that point herself during her post-game remarks. If they don't make all of those shots, she asked, is it a different ball game? And then honestly, she said she didn't know that caveat matters. Indiana's margin grew that night because open players made difficult shots, late clock attempts, and the kind of contested looks that a defense might accept over the course of a full season. A scheme that consistently generates open threes is a great scheme. A scheme that generates open threes and converts at 64% is an historically good shooting night layered on top of a great scheme. But here's where the counter-argument breaks down. It's treating the 64% as the story. It's treating the made shots as the thing that needs to be repeated. And that's the wrong question. The right question is whether Clark can repeat the choice, not whether Indiana can repeat the percentage. That distinction is everything. Shooting percentage describes what happens after the ball leaves someone's hands. Advantage creation describes what happened before the release. Those are two completely different conversations, and mixing them up leads to the wrong conclusions about Indiana's offense. The defense sent help. That help exposed a passing lane. Clark recognized the lane. Indiana generated a shot from the player the possession had freed. That sequence help lane, music, read shot doesn't care about the final percentage. It generates quality looks regardless of whether they fall. The looks were real. The defensive stress was real. The rotation failures were real. The made shots were the result, not the cause. DeMarco confirmed Indiana's interior players forced paint help. Ionescu confirmed Clark directed the kickouts. Neither coach claimed all 16 threes came from identical possessions. Transition plays, individual shot-making, broken possessions, and defensive mistakes all contributed. Basketball doesn't get that clean. But the mechanism doesn't need to explain every single basket. It needs to explain why the same defensive stress kept returning possession after possession after possession. Think about what that means for future opponents. A team could hold Indiana below 64% from three, comfortably below even, and still spend the entire game sending two defenders toward one action, rotating to cover Boston. And chasing the pass, Clark released a split second before anyone arrived. The structure creates the stress. The percentage is just how much it cost on a given night. Dallas gets the first crack at answering this problem when Indiana visits on August 14th. The Wings already beat the Fever in their regular season opener back in May, 107-104, a game Clark finished with 20 points and 7 assists, but also 5 turnovers and a late three-point attempt to tie that came up short. That result gives Dallas a reference point. It also gives them false comfort if they lean on it too heavily. Clark's 10-assist game against New York was her 19th career performance with at least 20 points and 10 assists, already the most in WNBA history. Mitchell enters with 17 consecutive 20-point games. The Fever have scored 100 or more points 15 times this season. Indiana is not the same team Dallas beat in May, and the numbers say so clearly. The Wings have options. They can switch more actions defensively, music keeping individual defenders attached to their specific matchups and reducing the immediate pressure on the paint. Music. That approach can limit the kickout problem, but it may hand Boston a size mismatch near the basket or leave Clark operating against a slower defender with open space in front of her. They can try zone coverage, placing more bodies near driving lanes without committing a second individual music defender to Clark in man-to-man. Zone defense can disrupt rhythm and muddy read and react offenses. It also gives an elite passer, which Clark absolutely is, fixed gaps to attack, particularly when Indiana can move the ball before the zone settles into position. Dallas can pressure Clark higher and more aggressively, trying to force the ball out of her hands before she builds momentum. New York's experience shows exactly what comes next in that scenario. Music, the defense must rotate behind that pressure before Mitchell, Boston, or anyone else receives the pass. A half-second late is still late enough. Every adjustment changes what Indiana gets. None of them remove the need to make a choice. The more revealing test comes on August 22nd, when Indiana returns to New York for the rematch. DeMarco will have everything. The same opponent, the same central organizer, music, and a complete post-game record of exactly what broke down in Indianapolis. He can change the initial coverage. He can shift help positioning. He can demand faster recoveries and earlier rotations. He has 2 weeks in a film room. What he cannot do, music, is erase the competing threats that created the problem. If New York protects the paint again, music, their perimeter rotations have to arrive earlier without giving Clark a cleaner driving lane through the middle. If they stay attached to shooters, the first defender has to contain Clark without backup arriving behind them. If they send 2 defenders near the ball, the remaining 3 have to cover Boston, Mitchell, and the weak side with no wasted movement and no hesitation. None of that is impossible. New York has beaten Indiana before. Clark turns the ball over. Shooters miss. Screens arrive at bad angles. Help. Defenders can disguise their intentions long enough to disrupt a read. No offense operates at peak efficiency every music possession. And Indiana's won't either. But the challenge isn't surviving one possession. It's the number of correct decisions required on every single possession. Indiana only needs one of those decisions to arrive late. Just one, music one rotation that takes a half step too long. One defender who waits an extra beat before closing music out. One moment where the defense is asking itself what to do when Clark has already decided. On August 11th, New York gave Indiana that moment repeatedly, and Clark made them pay every single time it appeared. Mitchell's 28 points punished the perimeter. Boston's 19 punished the interior. Clark's 22 preserved her status as a genuine scoring threat, not just a distributor, which meant New York could never assign a defender to shade solely toward her passing. And her 8 assists measured how often the ball reached the right answer after the defense committed somewhere it shouldn't have. That distribution of damage is harder to defend than one player going berserk. When a single player erupts for 45 points, you can double them, foul them, trap them, accept the kickouts, and trust your rotation. There's a clear target, a clear solution, or at least a clear attempt. Indiana gave New York no harmless destination. Music. Every available player made the next rotation urgent. There was no pass Clark could make to someone. Music, the defense was willing to abandon. Every release found a real threat. The Fever won't shoot 64% from 3 every night. That's the part of August 11th most likely to drift back to normal. Music defenses around the league can look at that number and find something resembling comfort there. But the sequence, the paint pressure, pulling help, Clark reading the gap, the right player receiving the ball, the shot going up. That sequence doesn't require 64%. Music requires execution. And Indiana has shown across 1,500-point games this season that the execution is consistent even when the percentages aren't historic. The shots can fall at an ordinary rate while the defense continues making an extraordinary number of decisions. That's the real problem. That's what ICU was actually describing when she answered what sounded like a routine post-game question. She wasn't narrating a hot shooting night. She was listing New York's defensive responsibilities in order. Handle the bigs, help in the paint, recover to the kickout, respect Clark's shot, contain her drive, survive the read. One possession can ask a defense to complete that entire checklist before the shot clock runs out. Dallas sees that checklist on August 14th. New York gets it again on August 22nd. And after both games, someone is going to walk up to the losing coach with a microphone and ask what went wrong. The answer is already written. It was written on August 11th in one sentence by the player who had just spent 40 minutes music trapped inside it. Their bigs are a handful. We have to help in the paint, which allows kickouts. That's the choice. That's always been the choice. And right now, nobody in the WNBA has figured out how to make it go.